I'm Ritchie Blackmore, sharing songs from my favorite guitar players. I was frightened. When I first heard Hound Dog, I think I was 10 or 11. I'd been listening to Frank Sinatra up until then with my dad in the household. I heard Hound Dog and I went, what the hell is this? This sounds like World War II. I mean, it was exciting, but frightening. And the solo of Hound Dog, fantastic. The guitar sound, especially on a song called Too Much, which was not one of Elvis's biggest songs, but the guitar solo was fantastic. The sound, it sounds like he's using piano strings on the guitar. It doesn't sound like a guitar. It sounds like this massive, and when you hear it, you'll know what I mean. It's fantastic. I'm Ritchie Blackmore, sharing songs from my favorite guitar players. I was a Buddy Holly fanatic. I just loved his voice. It was so different. It was country, but it had this other side to it, rock. And of course, when he died, my mother came in and woke me up when I was asleep. She said, Richard, that man that you like, what's his name? And he said, the one with the glasses. And I went, Buddy Holly? She said, oh yeah, he's dead. And then she pulled back the windows and woke me up for school. And I went, oh my God, my idol is dead. He was my idol. And of all the songs, I think It's So Easy was a very articulate guitar solo. It was a brilliant guitar solo. And I knew, even though I was a big fan of Buddy Holly, I knew it wasn't him playing. I could tell by the technique. And I looked into it and I did research for years to find out who really played the solo. And apparently my research came up with Tommy Allsop. And he's a session guitar player from the country, Nashville stuff. And he played occasionally with Buddy Holly. And then I heard his style and I went, that's him. I tracked down the guy that did the solo, because I think he was paid off not to say anything that he played guitar. But Buddy Holly was probably my biggest ever influence. And the Fender Strat, looking at the first Fender Strat on the cover of the Crickets was like, it's a space guitar. I'd never seen a guitar like that. So here it is. It's So Easy, Buddy Holly. Big Jim Sullivan, my guitar teacher. He used to play for Marty Wilde, who was a very big star in England, along with Cliff Richard and a few other people. And luckily, he was my neighbor. Not quite my neighbor. I used to cycle to his house. I would sit on his front doorstep and wait for him to come to the door and teach me something. And that period, I was about 12 or 13. I mean, he was so ahead of his time. He was frightening. And to see him playing the guitar, I thought, man, I can't believe someone can play that well. But he took his time to show me things. And one of the things he was teaching me was to read music and play some Segovia music, which we'll get to later. But he was my idol. I always remember going to his house and he came to the door and I said, can I come in for another lesson? He said, no, I'm vacuuming. And I went, God vacuums the house. I can't believe this. He's my God and he's going over the house with a vacuum. So after that, I used to volunteer with my mother and father and say, Dad, Mom, I'll vacuum the house because my God does that. So anyway, Jim Sullivan, he did a Chet Atkins song called Trombone. I loved the songs by Ricky Nelson. He had this wonderful guitar player called James Burton. He used to play the guitar and he would slur the notes in such a different way than most guitar players of the day were doing. And I tried to emulate that style. And actually, when I first met Jeff Beck, we were both comparing notes because he loved James Burton too. And so did Albert Lee. Albert Lee is another favorite guitar player of mine. And James Burton he played with these banjo strings on his guitar. And at the time I was doing like the equivalent of a Broadway play with all these singers, and I had to back all these singers. And I put banjo strings on my guitar. And I played my first solo, which was wonderful, but the rest of the show was totally out of tune. And everybody got together in the intermission and complained to me and saying, what the hell are you doing? Everything you played was out of tune. I said, yeah, I have banjo strings on my guitar, like James Burton. They said, well, put some bloody normal guitar strings on because, we can't go on with you playing out of tune. But James Burton, I don't know how he got away with it, but it worked for him. And one of the guitar solos I absolutely love, it gives me shivers, is Believe What You Say by Ricky Nelson. Trevor Rabin, I was never a Yes fan. I played with them a few times. Deep Purple and Yes used to share the bill very often back in, I think it was 69, 70. But Trevor Rabin joined Yes, and they were to me, a very well-organized band, but it was not my type of music. But when I heard Owner of a Lonely Heart, I heard that guitar solo, and it just rips your heart out. And it's obviously a synthesizer tuned in fifths, but it just worked. It was a fantastic solo. And I love that solo because it wasn't fast, but it just hit you right in the stomach with this sound. It sounds like someone's tearing your stomach out. And it had this fantastic, harsh, yet sensitive, and the notes were perfect. That's one of my favorite solos of the later guitar players, Trevor Rabin and Owner of a Lonely Heart. You have to hear this sound. It's magical. Django Reinhardt. Oh my God, when I heard him play, I thought, what the hell's going on? This guy is all over the map. This man is absolutely incredible. And I didn't understand a note he played because I would try to copy certain solos by other guitar players, but trying to copy anything that Django Reinhardt did was a joke. You could not keep up with him. A magical gypsy man that I've read so much about. And apparently he used to have all his gypsy friends into a hotel and they would make a fire in the middle of the room. Think they were having, they would have a campfire in the middle of the hotel room. And sometimes the hotel would nearly burn down. And I love the fact that he was also so isolated in the way that he would get paid to do a show in Paris. He would then get the money and take a taxi ride to Lyon. That's 300 miles away. And he would spend his money immediately that he made from the show. Then nobody could find him. He was always in the woods. And it was only when he needed some money, he would come out of the woods, did he actually do a show. I think I heard a quote once about Django plays nothing that anybody else can't play until you've had 100 years experience. So that kind of summed up Django Reinhardt. When I was 17, I was taken to a club in London by the driver of the van of the band that I was in, which was Screaming Lil Such and the Savages. So we went to this club called the Gioconda, that's what it was called, in Soho, in London. Albert was playing on stage with Ricky Barnes on saxophone. And I heard Albert and I thought, oh my God. So these are the guitar players that are in London. That's it for me. I'm finished. I thought, if everybody's like Albert Lee, I can't follow that. He was just incredible. And he would have been 18 at the time. And I since became very friendly with Albert, and I've done a lot of sessions with him. He is just phenomenal. And what was strange was in England, in a lot of the polls, the guitar polls, I would be a number 1 or 2 and what have you. And Albert would never be in there. And yeah, Albert is such a fantastic phenomenon. He took country to America and here, and he started playing with the Everly Brothers, Emmylou Harris, the other people. And he basically showed all the Nashville people how it was done. And if you listen to Country Boy, I don't think too many people can ever think about topping how good Albert is. But he's such a quiet man, very humble. Albert is one of my favorite friends. Jimi Hendrix, I only met him once. It was in the Whiskey in Hollywood. And I was going into the toilet and he was playing with his hair or something. It was, I mean, I always thought about Jimi Hendrix as being like the wild man of Borneo. And there he is, fixing his hair in the mirror. That was the only time I met him, and we kind of nodded to each other. And that was it. So I never really got to know him. Yet he certainly set the world on fire. When he came to England, Jeff Beck came up to me and said, "Ritchie, we've got to do something about this guy." I said, "Who are you talking about?" I said, "Jimi Hendrix. He's killing everybody over here. He's upsetting everybody." And I'm like, "Well, Jeff, if you can't do it, nobody else is going to do it," because I always thought of Jeff as being the best rock player. But he was a little bit upset. It was like, we've got to stop this guy. I'm like, who the hell is he? But when I heard Stone Free, and Hey Joe was on the other side, Stone Free is a fantastic solo. Jimi Hendrix used to tune down a semitone, which you call a half note, I think, to get the vibrato, and it certainly worked. His style and his riffing, and I followed him because I thought the way he used riffs, he would surround the song in a riff. It had magical moments again. Brilliant guitar player. And he also looked like he was from the moon. Really, in a way, he didn't have to play the guitar because he looked so strange and different to the typical English musician. And it worked, and I'm so glad it did. Unfortunately, he only worked for 3 years, but he certainly set the world alight. Les Paul and Mary Ford. My father used to play these records at home all the time. And so I grew up listening to Les Paul and Mary Ford. And again, I went to a session with Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page was producing. And Jeff and I had this moment where we were comparing notes of how much we knew about Les Paul. And Jeff came out with so many parts, so many pieces of Les Paul. He has a fantastic ear, Jeff. So he would copy all the Les Paul parts. I only had a few. And the one that I played to Jeff at the time was Little Rock Getaway. So I'm going to stick with that for the time being. Here's Little Rock Getaway, which is just one of the perfect solos by Les Paul and Mary Ford. One of my favorites growing up, I was 13, 14, 15, where I couldn't believe that someone could play with their thumb and fingers and play all the accompanying notes to the melodies. And he had this finger style technique, which was fantastic. And it's anything that Chet Atkins did was wonderful. So I think we'll listen to Copper Kettle by Chet Atkins. To me, when I first heard Eric Johnson, he's brilliant, but the tune that he had that was the big hit is very similar to Les Paul's Little Rock Getaway. So I thought, oh, Eric Johnson's obviously listening to a little bit of Les Paul there. And he had a big hit with that instrumental. But fantastic guitar player. and came out of nowhere. And I loved that instrumental he did. And I thought it was called White Cliffs of Dover, but it's called Cliffs of Dover. And fantastic piece. Great player. Great player. In Deep Purple, I was traveling so much, I got tired of that. And I got tired of the man that had to come up with the riffs. I didn't want to come up with any more riffs. I wanted to, and I loved medieval Renaissance music, and especially music from the 1500s, Tillman's Sassato, and shawms of all instruments. I could never actually learn to play, but it's not a chromatic instrument, so I couldn't relate to it, but I love the sound of the shawm. I will now hand you over to someone who makes much more sense than myself. Here's Candice Knight, my wonderful wife. Carry on.
I actually had never sung front and center stage before, although you did have me sing on the Deep Purple, the tour that you did. Mm-hmm. But then while the other guys were doing their tracks on the Stranger in Us All album, Rich and I would just be sitting by a fire, just writing our own songs, just in this beautiful old farmhouse in Massachusetts, a studio, Longview Farm, right? Yeah. And that was 25 years ago, where we began writing songs for ourselves, just as an escape from the pressures of the rock and roll world, I think, that Ritchie was facing at the time. And now here we are, 25th anniversary.
Very interesting. One point, I called up Candice and I said, we're not coming up with the lyrics of this particular new song that we have. And I knew that she could write lyrics. I said, can you come up with something? So she took the Long Island ferry and she got to where we were in Massachusetts. We were locked up in this studio. And she'd come up with, I think, 16 verses of this song on the way. It was unbelievable. And much to the chagrin of this singer, we used those verses, and the producer was over the moon because he thought, oh dear, we have a problem with the singer. He can't come up with the words. Candice came up with the words on the Long Island ferry, which we take now and again, and we expect a little bit of a discount for saying that.
But so the song that we chose to represent Blackmore's Night is one off of our latest album. The album's called Nature's Light. Mm-hmm. And the song is called The Second Element, which was originally a Sarah Brightman song.
Yes.
Who we're huge fans of.
Good friend.
Good friend and incredible voice.
Very
opera, pop opera kind of genre.
Yes.
And we heard her song on an album called Dive, and wrote to her producer, Frank, and said, oh my God, we love this song. It's kind of what Blackmore's Night represents as well, just this love of nature and the elements of water. And, we're very into nature. And he said he would love if we did, if we covered it. And we did, and Ritchie's got an incredible electric guitar solo on it, and I think it's something that everyone should hear. So
and it's okay.
I love it. So here it is, right?
Great song, great song.
And I'm Candice Knight.
Carry On John. It was something I wrote for John Lord. John and I put together Deep Purple way back. I was living in Hamburg, and I got a telegram from Chris Curtis of The Searchers saying, come on over. I need you. We're making a band. And I went, okay. So I actually came over to England, and I met Chris, who was obviously on some sort of medication. And he said, right, are you ready? And I said, well, who's in the band? He said, well, we have John Lord. And I met John Lord, and brilliant keyboard player. And I said, well, who's on bass? And he said, well, I am. I said, okay. So who's on drums? And Chris said, I am. And I said, oh, well, that's great. And he said, I'm also playing first guitar. He said, you're playing second guitar. And I went, okay, I'm playing second guitar to you. Very good. And that's how we started Deep Purple. We met the managers involved, and they thought he was a little bit crazy, so we got together, and I said to John Lord, I said, John, this Chris Curtis is a bit of a strange guy, right? He said, yes. Anyway, jumping forward, John was probably my best friend in the band, and And when he did pass away, it did affect me quite more than I thought it would. So I wrote the tune Carry On John. It was very difficult to actually play that particular tune on stage without becoming emotional. So this is for John.